Good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. The hour of 9:30 having arrived. House Revenue and Taxation is called to order. Our secretary is in the process of taking a silent roll. I have looked around the room and determined that we have a quorum and we're ready for business. We have one item on the agenda today. It's House Bill 93. Deals with parental choice tax credit legislation. And we're going to hear that presentation today from Senator Den Hartog. Senator, if you'd approach the podium, please introduce yourself after you turn on the mic. Tell us where you're from, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Lori Den Hartog, State Senator, District 22. This committee may be used to the fact that Representative Horman and I are sometimes two for the price of one. So we're tag teaming this morning. So I'm going to be doing the introduction. But if you have questions, either one of us can answer those questions. So Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for your consideration today is House Bill 93, an issue that many of you are familiar with and an important decision point that you have before you today. So House Bill 93 is about school choice, and school choice first and foremost is about kids and families, and it's not about the type of school or the type of system. We have a vibrant school choice ecosystem within the state of Idaho, and that's because of the hard work of many of the legislators in this room and in the building and those who came before us. We have traditional public schools, we have public charter schools, we have magnet schools, we have private schools, homeschools, or some combination thereof, which we've seen families do. We have numerous programs that provide our students with the ability to make choices and customize their education, including our Advanced Opportunities Program, Open Enrollment, and the Empowering Parents Microgrant Program. These are all things that we can be proud of as representatives of the people of Idaho. What we're talking about today is adding another piece of that puzzle, something additive to that ecosystem, not something that takes away from anything else, but gives families another choice and access to additional opportunities. So in today's world, where a child receives their education can be very fluid. The last several years have taught us this tremendously. Not only are our families very mobile within our state and across our country, but how and where and when they want their children to be educated is also changing. And I am here to suggest that we can change with the times as well. So as most of you know, my children attend a Christian school, and that was a choice that my husband and I made over 14 years ago. It has come with many sacrifices and many, many joys. I want to be clear with this committee, and you guys haven't maybe heard my spiel before, but I've said it on the floor over on my side of the rotunda. But I want to assure you, I'm not here for myself or for my children. As with previous legislation, I've made the commitment to my colleagues that if this were to pass and come into law, that my family will not be applying for this particular tax credit. And I think that's an important thing just for my colleagues and for the public to know. I make that declaration publicly. This isn't about me. This isn't about my family. This is about the Idaho kids and families, some of whom I hope you'll hear from today, who are looking for some additional support. So I provided you with the why. Let's walk through the rest. The who, what, when, and how. So the who. The bill starts and ends with parents because parents are best suited to decide how and where their children are educated. The accountability built into this legislation also starts and ends with parents. It begins with an eligible parent. You'll see that definition on page 2, subsection E, and an eligible student. And I want you to never forget that we're talking about Idaho parents and Idaho students. And this includes Idaho students with disabilities. When we talk about parents, we are talking about, we have priorities, and I'll get into the specifics of that, but we are giving priority to families who have income levels less than 300% of the federal poverty level. By example, a family of 4 in 2023, that was calculated at $90,000 per year. couple more of the of the WHO. Universal eligibility. So while priority is given to families of a lower income level, all families can apply for the tax credit. The structure is such that it is first come, first serve, and I'll answer Representative Gannon's question from one of our introductory hearings as we get into it. But I think understanding that all families can apply is really important. We don't know fully what the demand will be. We have studied other states and looked at the uptake rate for programs like this, and it can be a pretty small percentage. So we think what we have structured in the legislation provides opportunities for all to apply and the ability for a future legislature to consider changes if necessary. And that's true anytime we pass a piece of legislation. So the what? What does this actually do? So we're talking about a refundable tax credit of up to $5,000 per student and up to $7,500 for a student with disabilities. That up to amount is important. Built into the structure of the legislation is you have to have actually incurred the expenses. So if a family has not incurred expenses up to $5,000, maybe they incurred expenses up to $3,000. They can't claim the $5,000. It's only the up to amount of their actual incurred expenses. So what is it for? You'll see the definition of academic instruction. Page 3, subsection 2. Talks about the definition of academic instruction, and that is including, at a minimum, the 4, English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. And I will tell you, as legislators, you know this, right? The definitions are really important. So understanding the definitions helps you understand how the tax credit actually works. So qualified expenses. Qualified expenses include K-12 tuition and fees for attending a non-public school, tutoring, taking nationally standardized tests, assessments for college admissions, advanced placement exams, prep courses for national assessments, textbooks, curricula, and specific transportation costs. The total amount of the tax credit is capped at $50 million. And then we also have established a new fund for the tax commission to receive appropriation to make the advanced payments for parents who qualify, and I'll get into the advanced payments as well. When does it begin? You'll look at the enacting clause at the end of the legislation, and it would be retroactive to January 1st of this year, 2025, meaning that when families apply for, when families are getting ready to file their taxes in 2026, they would have to have incurred expenses in this tax year in 2025. So that is when the application period first takes place. So where does this education take place? You'll look at the definition of a non-public school. We've defined non-public school as a private school, a micro school, or a learning pod. Those are intentionally broad. One of the things that really excites me about this piece of legislation is we know about the choices and opportunities and things that may exist today, but what we don't know yet is what could exist in the future. We don't know yet that if families have access to these resources, what might become available in communities, that new options and new opportunities that don't exist today. Had a conversation with a mother in Meridian, and she said, my husband and I have a dream of opening a school specifically for kids with ADHD and ADD. She's like, this is our dream, to provide an environment where those kids can thrive. And they've tried a lot of different schooling options and have had some successes and some struggles. And so it's exciting to me to think about what could exist in the future. So, also in the where. When you look at the definition, it's on the bottom of page 1, continuing up to the top of page 2, that definition of non-public school. And this goes to the responsibility of parents. So the non-public school has to be one of two things, or provide one of two things. It has to be an accredited school, or if you look at it, continues on to the top of page 2, or you have to provide a documented or keep records of a documented portfolio of evidence or learning record, and you see that definition continue there, that demonstrates that those 4 academic subjects were covered in the instruction, no matter the type of setting. So those are the two options, and you'll see that the requirement is that the parent retain that documentation subject to audit by the tax commission if a family who's applied for the tax credit is subject to an audit by the tax commission. This is the normal way. What we do for how the process works for tax credits. Parents will have an attestation. They have to attest to their incurred expenses, and they will have to attest to which one of these options they're selecting for the non-public school where their child is receiving the education. Get back to my notes. So the how. Some of this I've covered, but the application process is the same for all parents, and there's universal eligibility, meaning that all families can apply. We have an application window of 60 days that would begin on January 15th, and that first application window would be January 15th of 2026 and be open for 60 days. Parents would be notified if they've been approved or not within 30 days of the application period closing. And that puts them in line for being able to file their taxes by the April 15th deadline. So a family won't be able to file their income taxes and claim the credit unless they've gone through that application process with the tax commission. So parents, now let's talk about the advanced tax payment option. A family whose income level is 300% of the federal poverty level or less can elect to do a one-time advance payment. This provides the opportunity for families who may not have the means to incur the expenses up front and then wait for the tax credit in the following tax year. So what that means is in the first year of participation for a family in this income level, they essentially would receive a double benefit in that first year, applying for the advanced tax payment, getting it in. So let's do our timeline of next year. So January 15, 2026, family applies on the first day, application window closes, they get notified at the end of that application that that they're eligible for the advanced tax credit payment. If they receive that payment, then in the remainder of 2026, they would have to actually incur education expenses utilizing those funds. And then when they file their taxes the next year in 2027, they will have to identify which categories of expenses, how those funds were used, and then they would be eligible, and that's how we have it drafted, they would be eligible to receive a tax credit that next year. The way it works is then at the end of eligibility for a student, at the end of that student's participation in the program, a family would not be able to claim the tax credit in the final year of participation. So whether that's when their student graduates, if that's how long they stay in a non-public school, or whether that is maybe they decide to go back to a different school, to a traditional public school or a public charter school, then they wouldn't be able to claim the credit in that final year of participation. So while there's a double benefit on the front end, it's recaptured on the end. So it is even for all families. So more on the how. And this goes to our accountability metrics as well. After a family has participated, at the end of that participation, and if they were to refile and claim the credit the next year, we are asking and requiring that parents have to complete a parent satisfaction and engagement survey. And you'll see that towards the end of the legislation. I believe it's subsection 14. Gotta get my page numbers. Subsection 14, page 5. So the Parent Satisfaction and Engagement Survey to be conducted by our Legislative Services Office shall include but not be limited to the quality of school leadership, school safety, student engagement, quality of academic instruction, and quality of learning outcomes. You may ask why a survey? What good does a survey do? This is something we actually do in our public schools. It's part of our public school quality and accountability measures. That was actually where we got the idea. We were looking at what our schools do and understanding parent satisfaction with the school choices that they've made for their children, and a student's engagement is important to understanding the quality of education that a child may receive. Again, on the how, the penalty for misusing the program is a possibility of felony prosecution for tax fraud. I would submit to you that this is a pretty significant portion of the accountability structure built into this legislation. We've talked a lot about how to do something like this and what it should look like, and what we've settled on and what the co-sponsors and I have been working on, and with many of our colleagues both on this side and on the other side, is something that looks different than what we have. We're not trying to recreate the same system. We're not trying to recreate what we have. We have parents and families and kids who are looking for something different and access to something different. We think that we have struck the balance in this piece of legislation. And if I could phrase it differently from my who, what, when, where, how, and why, let's talk about it in the lens of the tasks that the gentleman on the second floor gave us. He gave us the task without defining, so we have the ability to define these words: fair, accountable, transparent, and responsible. So let's think about it in that lens. So fair, all can apply, but those most in need receive the highest priority. We have students with greater needs have access to greater funding, which is consistent with how we fund students within our public education system. Accountable. This starts and ends with parents. We've talked about the possible liability for tax fraud if there's misuse of funds. And then parents are also responsible for ensuring and retaining documentation to demonstrate the areas of academic instruction are taught. That's either the accreditation or that portfolio of learning. And then parents provide feedback through the survey, and this will inform and educate us. This will provide insight and instruction to the legislature as we fine-tune this program, should it go all the way through the process. And that's something we're used to. I think sometimes, we come into the legislature and we think, oh, we've got a great idea, and we're always busy fixing the things that maybe, we did before. And that's a part of the process. It is an iterative process. It continues. It does not end. Transparent. The Tax Commission is required to submit a report to the legislature. You'll see that on page 4, subsection 13, all the elements that the Tax Commission is required to submit back to the legislature and the governor and the committees. So the elements of that are the tax credits, all the amount of the tax credits provided, the number of parents who applied, and I did fail to mention, we are asking the Tax Commission if the program becomes fully subscribed, we are asking the Tax Commission to keep a wait list so we can understand what families and how many families are interested in applying for that. We're asking the Tax Commission to provide the number of credits distributed to parents with the income level 300% less than, or 300% of the federal poverty level, the number of parents who applied for the advance payment, the geographic area, and the number of eligible students on the wait list, and then a list of the categories of qualified expenses so we can understand how the funds are being used. And then so that's under transparency. And then finally, responsibility. And this, I think you'll see, you'll know by one of my co-sponsors, and two of my co-sponsors, both co-chairs of our Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. The cap of $50 million is an important consideration in this legislation. We've studied what other states have done. We've seen it, and we've learned from it. And we've talked to our colleagues. We're trying to strike the balance of what they might be comfortable with, and understanding that we are not having an open-ended program with a cost that we don't know. That's why we proposed the $50 million cap on that. And at this point, I'll address Representative Gannon in a introduction hearing had asked, are there other examples of states, and, can we do this? Are there capped tax credits? I have a couple of examples. I'm going to get all my papers mixed up here, but got it all highlighted. So a couple of examples of capped tax credits. Hawaii offers a refundable research and development tax credit, capped, that's a first come, first served basis, that's capped at $5 million. Alabama has a child care tax credit for businesses, and that the cap was raised in 2024 to $20 million. Louisiana provides a commercial tax credit program that is capped with an annual cap of $125 million. So we have examples across the country of capped tax credits. So I think the structure is reasonable, and it still provides opportunity for the legislature to weigh in at a future date. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Den Hartog. Committee, are there questions for Senator Den Hartog or the co-sponsor, Representative Horman? Keep in mind, I want to have a significant amount of time for public testimony, so we've had a lot of opportunity to voice questions and gain understanding, but I will give a few minutes to question the sponsors. Representative Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, good Senator. So my question goes to the fiscal note. And as it relates to accountability, the last sentence in the fiscal note says no additional FTEs are being requested because of existing vacancies within the Idaho Tax Commission. We all know how agencies work. There's vacancies all the time. Some of those could be secretarial, some IT. My question is, I guess, has there been confirmation by the Tax Commission that under this new tax type, they do have the staff to oversee this or administer this tax type so that there is accountability?
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, the representation in the fiscal note is representative of the conversations that we've had with the Tax Commission. I would say we're still in ongoing conversations with the Tax Commission to fully understand how many they might need. What I can tell you today is this is our best understanding of their current availability to operate the program and operate it with fidelity as we've drafted it. They have been involved and have provided feedback. It's always an interesting dialogue, and I don't know, I'm looking at my co-sponsor. It's always an interesting dialogue with an agency. A lot of times the first response back is a really, really high number of how many staff they think they might need. But I will tell you, it is still an ongoing conversation with the Tax Commission to understand if we may need more. And we would have the opportunity, pardon me, to adjust the fiscal note in the future if that conversation has changed.
Thank you, Senator, for a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up, Representative Raymond.
Thank you. On page 4 of the bill, beginning on line 22, it is stated, and you've referenced the waiting list, the Tax Commission shall create and maintain a waiting list demonstrating who would be eligible on a first-come, first-served basis if the annual maximum limit for credits allowed under this section is increased. Is it the intent of this legislation to go past the $50 million cap? Should there be a waiting list that indicates demand?
Senator Den Hartog.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no, not as it would be implemented. That would be a decision for a future legislature. In order to, no credits could be issued beyond the $50 million. The wait list would inform or could inform this committee or a different set of us in the future. Should there actually be a wait list, then that would be a consideration for a future legislature to consider an increase if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Raybold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Den Hartog, thank you for your presentation this morning. Last week in committee, we had a presentation from the Tax Commission, and they ran through a breakdown of property taxes, and they identified that roughly $439 million in property taxes went towards our schools. There's roughly 693,000 households in Idaho, so that comes out to an average, and I get that it's an average, of $634 in property taxes per household is going to public schools. In addition, this body just voted on a income tax reduction that would bring the average income tax for 80% of Idahoans to $3,800 a year or less. You're proposing a tax credit of $5,000 per child with no cap per household. How is this not wealth redistribution using a government subsidy?
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Raybold, I would submit to you we can consider it in a different light. These are Idaho students, some of which are already in Idaho public schools, of which we all share the cost in paying for. When a student walks through the doors of a public school in the state of Idaho, it costs the state $9,000 at a minimum based on our current funding formula. And this is obviously less than that. So I think we can look at it differently in terms of where the students are. These are all Idaho kids, and that's how I would answer it.
Thank you, Senator. Follow-up?
Please. So, Senator, you had mentioned in your presentation empowering parents and advanced opportunities as other programs that have been available. I've seen nothing in the legislation that would suggest a parent participating in this new program would be prevented from participating in the Empowering Parents program or in advanced opportunities. Is it the intention of the bill that if a parent was so inclined, they could apply for both the tax credit, they could apply up to the household cap of $3,000 for empowering parents, and then I believe the amount per non-public student for advanced opportunities is $2,250. So in a family of 3, you're looking at roughly a potential amount of $25,000 in public funds going to a family from 3 different programs. Does this bill allow for a parent to select the opportunity to participate in all 3 programs?
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for the question. I'm looking for my code citation. We do have a prohibition on you cannot do both the Empowering Parents program and the tax credit program. I'll find the code cite for you in the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask for a clarification as she's looking for the reference?
Yes, one more time, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, it's just for a clarification. I just want to make sure that it said, I believe, that you couldn't use the same expenses to qualify for both, but I don't think it indicated you couldn't participate in both programs.
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Raybold. The reference is on page 2 at the end of the definition of qualified expenses, and it does identify that you could not use the microgrant program and then claim the tax credit with the use of those funds.
Representative Cornelius.
First, thank you for being here today and bringing this to our attention. With all the data coming out now about early childhood learning, had you given any thought about building that into this bill?
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Cornelius. It was part of our conversation. I'm going to be careful referencing other things that are happening. The state of Idaho has a constitutional obligation in public education beginning at age 5 and in kindergarten. We haven't fully addressed that issue even within the public system in the state of Idaho related to pre-K or early learning. And that was part of the reason we ended up not including it in this piece of legislation. I still think that is a bigger conversation to be had all across the board in this body.
Vice Chair Weber, and this will be the last question we take before we move into our public testimony segment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, thank you for your presentation. As I read through the bill, the question that arises is bringing in 2 state agencies that, to my knowledge, have little experience and maybe no experience in educational realm. The legislative service offices, as I read, will send out a parent satisfaction engagement survey to evaluate the performance of non-public schools. And then on page 2, when it talks about the parent will document in a portfolio of evidence or learning record that indicates the student's growth. At the bottom of that paragraph, it says that they shall maintain this in the subsection shall be available in the case of an audit by the State Tax Commission. I guess my question is, walk us through what that audit might look like when they look at the portfolio and when they look at the legislative service office's performance.
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Weber, just for a clarification, the survey is only reported back to the legislature and conducted. I had conversations with our Legislative Services Office and staff who said, we've done surveys, this is something we can do, and that's why you see the item in the fiscal note that there's no additional cost with the Legislative Services Office conducting that survey. So the survey is a closed loop back to the legislature, not back to the Tax Commission. The only interplay there is that in the conducting of the survey, a parent would have to demonstrate when they file their taxes the next year that they completed it. So documentation, we can work with LSO in working out the specifics of what that looks like to say, that a parent has completed the survey so they can check that box in the application. And again, if they don't have that, then that's missing an element in that application for the tax credit and they wouldn't be eligible that next year. As it relates to the Tax Commission, they do all kinds of things they're not the subject matter experts in. I can't speak to the specifics of how they might conduct an audit, but they certainly understand and deal with a variety of issues and a variety of different tax types and subject areas, and I fully anticipate that they can handle an audit in this arena.
May I follow?
One follow-up.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, thank you for those answers. I guess my focus is on when it says students' growth. And here you turn this over to a state tax commission. How do those correlate, students' growth and audited by the state tax commission?
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Weber. Like we do with all parents and families, if I look at my student's report card, I have documentation, I have understanding from their teacher where they've had areas of growth. I would be able to demonstrate what that looks like in their different subject areas.
Thank you, Senator Den Hartog. You may have a seat. We appreciate you joining our committee today and for your presentation.
Thank you.
We will now go into our public testimony segment. I'm going to give you the first three testifiers, and then we'll try to do that as the hearing continues so that people can be ready and we won't have a gap in the testimony. We'll first hear from Alexis Morgan. Second, we'll hear from Chris Cargill. And third, from Dr. Jean Henscheid. As Alexis Morgan is approaching, I'll just indicate that we have set a 2-minute limit on testimony. We'll enforce that fairly strictly today so that we hear from as many people as we can. Alexis, please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, who you represent, if anybody, and 2 minutes are yours.
I'm Alexis Morgan. I live in Eagle, Idaho, and I represent the Idaho Congress of Parents and Teachers, also known as Idaho PTA, as their president. We know that Idaho is a leader in educational freedom, offering 9 school choice options for our families. My children, who are 6th-generation Idahoans, have benefited from these opportunities. And the good gentleman on the second floor emphasized that any school choice measure must be fair, accountable, responsible, and transparent. And upon reviewing House Bill 93, I noted that the bill does not meet these standards. I'll share 4 examples. Fair. The bill references kindergarten funding. Idaho funds kindergarten at 25% in public schools. This bill proposes to fund kindergarten in non-public schools at 100%. Idaho's basic requirements do not include kindergarten, thus the bill fails to meet the fairness standard. Accountable. The transportation costs are a covered expense for travel to the non-public school. How will auditors ensure accountability for this expenditure? For instance, parents who work outside the home often drop their children off at school on their way to work. Does the inclusion of transportation expenses covered imply that the state is subsidizing a parent's commute to work? Responsible. The Idaho Tax Commission is given responsibility in monitoring the program, including assessing for student growth. The Tax Commission expertise is strictly within the realm of taxation. Without a dedicated framework and collaboration with education professionals, it is unlikely the Commission would have the tools or knowledge necessary to effectively audit such a growth. Thus, the reliance on the Tax Commission to audit student growth is not responsible. Lastly, the Parent Satisfaction and Engagement Survey fails to meet the standards of being fair, accountable, responsible, or transparent. While referencing terms like academic quality and learning outcomes, The bill provides no clarity on how the measures will be defined or assessed. The survey's issuance is assigned to the Legislative Services Office, an entity without expertise and parent satisfaction or engagement. Furthermore, the bill fails to specify who will develop the survey, creating a critical gap in accountability and implementation. It is Idaho PTA's request that you vote no on House Bill 93, as it fails to uphold the Idaho way of bringing school choice to Idaho families. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Morgan? Seeing none, we thank you for your testimony today. Chris Cargill, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from, who you represent, and the...
Good morning, Chairman Cannon, members of the committee. I'm Chris Cargill, the president of the Mountain States Policy Center. I appreciate the invitation to address you this morning. I realize there's a lot of passion on this particular topic. I'd like to address 4 points this morning: the cost, the research, the polling, and the legal questions. First of all, as the senator indicated, this bill is capped at $50 million. That is, comparatively speaking, just 0.0185%. 0.0185% of the state's K through 12 budget. There are roughly 36,000 students in our state who attend private or homeschooling, and collectively, they save the state about $300 million a year because they opt out of the public school system. Second, the research. The data is crystal clear that choice improves outcomes. There are at least 187 empirical research pieces on choice programs across the nation. I've included the title and the research piece in your packet of every single one of those this morning. 84% of those studies show a positive outcome from choice, including participant test scores, parental satisfaction, integration, and civic values. Third, the polling. Because this idea came up a year ago, we actually included a question in our recent Idaho poll of 800 residents taken in December that included asking them about this very exact proposal that was introduced last year and again this year of a $5,000 tax credit. 66% of Idahoans were in favor, majorities across party lines, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And finally, the legal cases. We have completed a review of dozens of legal cases involving education choice programs, which again is in your packet this morning. And there are themes that define what is and what is not constitutional. And I can tell you, based on the review, that this program that you have before you today does meet the constitutional threshold. Thank you very much. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Yes, Representative Raybould.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Mr. Cargill, in the presentation that you held in this building at the beginning of the session, you made reference to the fact that the majority of families in other states who are making use of these programs, their average salaries are $60,000 to $80,000. And yet, if I look at the federal poverty limit now, in order to get down to that range, I'm looking at families of 3. So can you help me understand why we should be supporting a program that colors beyond the lines that you referenced in your presentation as to who is actually using these programs in other states and why we should look at skewing higher when it comes to income?
Mr. Cargill.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Raybould, a couple of points here. That specific presentation that we were mentioning talked about the median household income of the families participating in Indiana, which was roughly $82,000, and in Arizona, which was roughly $61,000. That's based on the latest data that they've given us. Obviously, it's up to all of you as legislators to determine what that threshold should be in Idaho. We are not here today to tell you that it should be higher or lower than that. That was simply a way for us to show you that it is not just the rich or the wealthy who are taking advantage of this. In fact, those folks do not take advantage of a program like this in the other states. What we've typically seen is that $60,000 to $80,000 threshold of families participating. What will happen here in Idaho, as you know in the bill, it says 300%, so it can't go any higher than that unless this committee and this legislature takes action.
Further questions, Representative Andrus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cargill. I've got a lot of people that reach out to me and concerned about the accountability. Can you touch a little bit on the accountability of this bill and how that is sufficient, and then also what is the real accountability in our public schools?
Mr. Cargill.
Chairman Cannon, Representative, I think it's a great question, and I would submit to you that the ultimate accountability lies with the parents. I think if you asked any parent in the state, they would tell you that they are the most responsible for their child's education. In terms of this particular bill, the parental satisfaction survey will go a long way, I think, in helping all of you understand, helping the public understand how these programs and this particular credit is being used. In other states that have adopted these programs, parents are required to do different things. Every state is different, and I'm not here this morning to tell you that you should do it like Arizona, or you should do it like Florida, or you should do it like Oklahoma. In fact, you should do it like Idaho. You should come up with an Idaho-specific plan, and I'm sure there will be other proposals put forward in this session. There have been in previous sessions, but based on our analysis of this particular proposal, it is perhaps the least bureaucratic of any proposal that has been put forward, and is the most responsible in terms of giving you the information you need to make sure that the program is successful.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Cargill. Directing your attention to page 6, lines 1 through 4, states that the provision of this section shall not be construed to permit any government agency to exercise control or supervision over any non-public school, or to give the state authority to regulate the education of non-public school students. I read that to say that the state of Idaho could not even require a criminal background check for teachers in these non-public schools to teach our kids. Is that correct?
Mr. Cargill.
Chairman Cannon, Representative Gannon, I would tell you that that's a better question for the sponsors of the bill. I'm not here today to tell you whether that is accurate or not. I would direct that question back to the sponsors.
Representative Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say if we're going to ask questions about what the accountability is in the current public school system, I think I'd prefer to hear that from people from the State Board of Education, the State Department of Education, who are responsible for that accountability, and not a third-party lobbyist. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's restrict our questions to questions. If you want to comment or debate something, save that for the later segments of the hearing. Thank you, Mr. Cargill. We appreciate your time. Next up is Dr. Jean Henscheid. As she's approaching, I'm going to give the list of the testifiers that will follow her. That would be Tammy Emmerich, Eleanor Cheney, and then Alan Hollett. And I apologize if I mispronounce those names, but it's your own fault for bad handwriting. Dr. Jean Henscheid, please introduce yourself, and the time is yours.
Chair Cannon, Vice Chair Weber, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Jean Henscheid, co-president of the League of Women Voters of Idaho. We oppose House Bill 93. For years, the League has pressed the legislature to adequately fund public schools. Over the years, state lawmakers have transferred responsibility for public school funding to property owners. Idahoans care about their public schools and usually vote to take on this burden. But for some families and communities, the budgets are just too tight. When local property tax levies fail, schools and students fall farther behind. House Bill 93 is a further abdication of the legislature's responsibility. This proposal would use our taxes to establish a second system of schools. It is unfair, irresponsible, opaque, and lacks any measure of accountability to taxpayers. Besides taxpayers, the losers are the students in Idaho's rural communities. Aberdeen, Sugar City, Pollock, Ingham, Notice, Manan, Fruitland, Hinckley, and my hometown, Blackfoot. In voucher states, program budgets start out small. When private schools make promises that they will serve families better than public schools, demand rises and costs skyrocket. At the breaking point, future legislators will sit in judgment of Idaho's children to decide whom to refuse. Public education budgets shrink, schools close, and certified teachers lose their jobs. And all along, no state has proven that student learning has improved under these programs. I invite you to use a critical eye when looking at Mr. Cargill's research. All boats do not rise under voucher systems. Public ones sink. We ask you to vote no on House Bill 93. Any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions for Dr. Henscheid? Seeing none, we certainly appreciate your testimony. Thank you for coming in. Tammy Emmerich is making her way to the podium. When you get here, Tammy, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, who you represent, if anyone, and you have 2 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Emmerich. I'm the superintendent of Catholic schools for the Diocese of Boise. I serve 16 Catholic schools in our state. Thank you for considering House Bill 93. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I would like to talk to you about the value of our Idaho Catholic schools. Our schools are family-oriented and student-focused. We believe that our parents are the primary educators of their children, and they make the choice to attend our Catholic schools in our state. The alignment with our faith and family values is the reason our families choose our schools. Belonging and inclusion is important in all of our schools. We have a welcoming environment. And I want to debunk some of the myths out there. 12% of our population have a range of disabilities in our Idaho Catholic schools. That is in alignment directly with Idaho numbers in public schools and the students that they serve. I want to talk a little bit about accountability in our schools. I always hear the argument that private schools are not accountable. All of our schools are accredited through the Western Catholic Education Association, which is in alignment with Cognia, which is the state model for accreditation. Our teachers are certified in our Idaho Catholic schools, and we go through Idaho certification guidelines, and all of our teachers do have background checks. We have high levels of achievement and engagement in our schools. Our test scores supersede our public school counterparts, even in alignment and consideration of that 12% of our students who do have disabilities, again, similar to public schools. Our students take the MAP test, which is from the Northwest Education Association, and we emphasize student growth and making sure that all of our students are learning.
Ms. Emmerich, if you can wrap up in one sentence.
Yes. I want to highlight our math scores in comparison to the state. Our 8th graders are scoring at 62.5% at or above proficient. The state of Idaho 8th graders score at 40.8% at or above proficient. And I have documentation for all of this. If you would like to see any of that, I will submit that. So please vote yes for House Bill 93 in favor of our parents should have the choice to choose the education that best fits their students. Thank you.
Thank you.
I stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Emmerich? Representative Raybold.
Thank you, Representative Cannon. Thank you for being here today. So some of the discussion that's come up is related to the cost of tuition. And in other states, we have seen that when similar legislation has passed, that tuition increases have gone up, sometimes in direct correlation with how much the available tuition reimbursements were provided by the state. Are you indicating here today that you don't anticipate that your schools would raise their tuition as a result of this legislation passing?
I don't anticipate that they...
Through the chair, please.
Oh, excuse me.
You have the floor
Sorry
to
about
respond.
that.
You're okay.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Raybold, I don't anticipate that our schools would raise their tuition. Most of our schools fall right around the $5,000 tuition range, which would be the allotment.
Thank you. I see no further lights. Actually, Representative Monks.
Thank you. Chairman, just raise a question for me. I know I've seen concerns that $5,000 doesn't cover a cost of an entire education there with different programs like yours. Do you have programs for low-income individuals as far as to help with their tuitions?
Ms. Emmerich, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Monks, most of our schools at a minimum offer $30,000 to support families who need extra support. That's in our smaller schools. That goes up to $90,000 where our schools are supporting families who want a Catholic education.
Thank you. Seeing no further lights, we appreciate your testimony. Thank you very
Thank you.
much for joining us. Up next is Eleanor Cheney. Ms. Cheney, thank you for joining our committee today. Please introduce yourself, tell us who you represent, if anyone, and where you're from, and the time is yours.
Yes. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Eleanor Cheney, representing the United Women in Faith, formerly the United Methodist Women. We're a state organization of about 500 members. I live in Boise. I am here to ask you to vote no on House Bill 93. We have been following these bills for several years and find that they are not good for our children, the public schools, and other public services. We recognize that House Bill 93 has the accountability that Governor Little said he wants in the program. The problem is that once this gets started, all the parents whose children are in private schools want the same tax breaks for their families. The cost runs into hundreds of millions of dollars in other states. Over the last 24 years, the legislature has reduced income tax rates by 30%. With the proposal in House Bill 40, the reduction becomes 34.5%. How much increased spending can the state finance with these reductions? How will we deal with emergencies? Other states that have gone down this path have found themselves short on revenue, and the school districts have had to beg for more supplemental levy or property tax levies. The money from this program goes to families with money and private schools in a few counties. Look at the map from Idaho Ed News that's in your handouts. Where do the students in your district go to school? Is this really good for your district? The money would be better spent on special ed for the public schools. Please vote no on House Bill 93.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there questions for Ms. Cheney? Seeing none, thank you again. We're going to invite Alan Hewlett to the mic. He'll come and introduce himself and start. Before he does that, I will announce that at the conclusion of his testimony, we are going to hear remote testimony via email that will be read through a technology app that reads emails. This is in furtherance of our commitment to hear from testifiers and constituents from across the state. So we're going to do that with 3 emails as soon as this testimony is over. Mr. Hewlett, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Mr. Alan Howlett, and I am the superintendent at Coal Valley Christian Schools here in Boise and Meridian, Idaho. I've been in education for 35 years, so a long time. My first passion was to impact and touch kids. I did 17 years in public education and now 18 years in private education. I started out as a passionate man to be able to impact kids' lives, and when I got into Christian education just 18 years ago, that only increased in the opportunity that we had to combine faith as a part of what families really want for their kids, and they could choose our school. School choice is great for kids. That's what I'll say. I've been doing this my entire life. I jokingly tell the kids at my own school, I've never left school, so I'm not sure what it is like to not be out of school, but since kindergarten, I've never left. And certainly don't plan on for the next 10 or 15 years as well. Coal Valley Christian Schools, if you don't know much about it, we're the largest independent private Christian school in the state of Idaho. We grew significantly over the last few years. We went from 740 to almost 1,350 kids in the last 4 years. And I believe we make an incredible home for a lot of families. We're excellent in education. Our SAT scores, like my Catholic brothers and sisters, are significantly higher than state and national averages. We are dually accredited as well, Cognia, as well as ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International. 55% plus of my staff is a master's degree or above, and they get paid significantly less than public education teachers. We have a special needs program that is maybe even more than 12%. 140 plus students are in a part of our educational program, and families do have to pay extra for those services because, of course, it's very expensive to do. Accountability. Parents are our most significant accountability. It's simple. They stop paying tuition if we are not accountable to exactly what they want to see happening with their kids and if we're not progressing. And we partner with these parents knowing that they are the primary educators of their kids.
Thank you, Mr. Howlett. Appreciate that. Your time is up. We will take, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Your handwriting is very legible. It was my fault.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Howlett? Representative Raybould.
Chairman Cannon, just a quick one. Do you have a policy at your school that allows for any student to enroll regardless of their faith or the denomination that they attend?
Mr. Howlett. We allow all Christian denominations to be a part of our school.
Other questions, committee? Seeing none, we thank you very much for coming and testifying today.
Thank you.
We're going to set up this email reading app. Just so you're aware, we'll hear from 3 testifiers via this, and they are from the geographically diverse areas of Elk River, Driggs, and Twin Falls.
Ruby Stroskin. Dear House Revenue and Taxation Committee members, I am writing to express my strong opposition to any proposals that would implement school voucher programs in Idaho. As your constituent, I am deeply concerned about how such policies could negatively impact public education and our communities. As of the 2021 to 2022 academic year, there were approximately 16,843 students enrolled in private schools offering grades 1 through 12 in Idaho. This represents about 5.1% of the state's total student population, compared to 312,643 students in public schools. Private schools in Idaho vary in size and affiliation. For instance, Bishop Kelly High School in Boise, a Roman Catholic institution, serves around 945 students. Nampa Christian Schools, offering education from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, enrolls approximately 920 students. The Ambrose School, a Christian school in Meridian, has about 568 students. It's important to note that private schools in Idaho are concentrated in urban areas. At least 17 of Idaho's 44 counties lack a private school, and 9 counties have just one. Having pointed out the biggest flaw in diversion of taxpayer dollars to subsidize such a small percentage of the Idaho student population, you're proposing to divert public funds to private and often unaccountable schools, leaving our public schools already operating on tight budgets, without the resources they need to serve the other 95% of Idaho K, 12 students. Public schools are a cornerstone of our democracy, providing equitable access to education regardless of a child's background, income, or location. Weakening their funding could harm not just the students who remain in public schools, but also the communities that depend on them. Furthermore, voucher programs often fail to deliver the academic outcomes they promise. Research consistently shows that students using vouchers to attend private schools frequently perform no better, and in some cases worse, than their public school counterparts. Idaho's education dollars are better spent strengthening our public schools, improving teacher pay, and ensuring smaller class sizes, rather than subsidizing private education. I urge you to stand with Idaho's families and vote against any legislation promoting school vouchers. Instead, I ask you to advocate for increased investment in public schools to ensure that every child in our state has access to a high-quality education. Thank you for your service and for considering the needs of all Idahoans and not just 5%. I look forward to hearing your position on this critical issue. Kind regards, Ruby Stroskin, Elk River. Lindsay Love, Driggs, Idaho. Hello, and thank you all for your service to our state. I want to share my thoughts about House Bill 93. I live in Teton County, Idaho, next to Jackson, Wyoming. While I was not fortunate enough to become a parent, I am very involved in my community. I am a cross-country ski coach here for middle and high school age kids. Our public school program is so poorly funded that teachers chose to drive the hour to work in Jackson where they can earn a living wage. My ski program has declined significantly because our public schools are so poorly funded that wealthy enough parents send their children to school in Wyoming by the time they're in high school, which means our program loses. 10 years ago, all of my athletes were in public school. We grew in size and a mix of 50-50, but have since reduced to 0 public school athletes. The rest are homeschooled, and we have lost the majority of our athletes to the Jackson program. A contributing factor is that the public school system here has gone to 4 days per week, which means that public school athletes could not participate or they must get early out. Our program was a convenient, productive opportunity for kids to learn discipline, socialization, collaboration, goal setting, and perspective. Now it is virtually non-existent. Instead of passing HB 93, I strongly request that you instead consider more funding for public schools. I can see that if vouchers are the solution, it will further tear our community apart because we do not have private schools in this valley. The solution will be either homeschool, online school, or even more families will send their children to another state for education. None of these support true socialization nor athletics programs, which are fundamental to individual and community growth. I do not wish for my property taxes to increase in order to support individual families sending their children to another state or having the freedom to use that money however they want. HB 93 would be irresponsible to a large portion of the Idaho population and seems like a non-Republican bill. Thank you for considering my perspective.
As we're booting up the last letter, let me just state that we have had this program in place now all session. I indicated that I would select in proportion to the responses, which ones to play, which ones to read, based on pro and con. The overwhelming majority of responses were con, and so all 3 of these selections that we're reading are con. So that is by way of explanation. Thank you.
My name is Melody Lankner. I reside in Legislative District 24 in Twin Falls. I am against House Bill 93, yet another iteration of HB 39. As a founder of a charter school, I can tell you that there are already many options available to parents in the form of alternative instruction in charter schools and magnet schools. An educated public is key to a strong democracy. This bill would draw funds away from public education, compromising rural school districts, where there are no other options aside from the public school, and leaving behind students whose parents are not educated enough to advocate for alternative education for their children. In addition, the charter school I founded was held to the same strict accountability standards as the regular public school. As a taxpayer, I want accountability for my tax dollars, and there will be no such accountability in the private schools. I am opposed to House Bill 93 for the above reasons and many others that I won't list at this point. Thank you for listening. I urge you to defeat this bill in committee. Melody Lankner.
Thank you. Representative Birch, you have your light on for what purpose?
Yeah, just 30 seconds to make a comment on the emails that we've received to put some context to this that's very unique and I've never seen before.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Point of order.
Yes.
There is no bill in front of us to debate.
No.
So unless there's questions, there's really no comments that should be made at this point.
It's not a debate, an item of debate. I just wanted to point out that all of these emails
Let me
I've
just
seen-
interrupt you there. We're not in a segment of the hearing that we're going to hear from the committee with regard to what you've seen in your emails and so forth. You can take that into account in your own consideration of the bill before us. You can debate it later, but we aren't in that segment. We're in the public testimony segment. We will continue with public testimony. We are coming to the end of the time that we have for public testimony. I anticipated that we would stop public testimony at 20 to 11 to allow time for a discussion and a debate and a vote prior to our floor session. So we will wrap this up with two additional witnesses. First, Joshua Price, and then Dr. Mary Mosley. Joshua Price, if you'll approach the mic when you get here, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, who, if anyone, you represent, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Commander Retired, U.S. Navy, Joshua Price. I'm a parent and a taxpayer. I'm not an advocate for any particular group other than the parents and the taxpayers. Thanks to time in the Navy, my 3 kids have been in at least 11 schools that we could tell over their time. My oldest is currently a sophomore in college. I have a senior in high school and an 8th grader. In those 11 schools across 3 countries and 4 states, there's a big difference. And we were so excited when we got to Idaho and we could pick which school our children were going to go to, as opposed to being on base or being, in a community where there was only one place. And I could tell you that I bet most of you don't buy one size fits all socks, because one size does not fit all, right? I am super excited about the choice opportunities that are available through this bill. I grew up, and my wife grew up in a rural Montana school district. My dad built roads and bridges to pay for his ranching habit, which motivated me to go to college, as you might imagine. Okay? And so I want for my kids better than what I had. And that's why when we retired from the Navy, moved here to Idaho because of the options for different schooling. We drive used cars. We bought a fixer-upper. And, I don't have a big 401k because we feel it's important for our kids to have the best opportunity that we can find for them, right? And as far as background checks on teachers, if the school didn't have background checks, we'd probably tell them, we're out of here. Parents are good accountability.
Mr. Price, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Price? Seeing none, we thank you again, and we'll hear from our final testifier, Dr. Mary Mosley. Dr. Mosley, if you don't mind introducing yourself, 2 minutes are yours.
So I'm not Mary Mosley, but I'm speaking for Mary Mosley. She had an appointment that she had to leave for.
Introduce yourself with your own name then.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Ruck. I live in Treasure Valley, but I'm speaking for Dr. Mary Mosley. I am Dr. Mary Mosley, president of the American Association of University Women of Idaho. Our mission is equity for women and girls. We oppose this bill because we believe that high-quality public education is the foundation of a democratic society and the key to economic prosperity and college and career readiness. American public schools are a unifying factor among the diverse range of students with and without disabilities, LGBTQ students, and students from different racial, ethnic, and religious groups in our society. Private schools do not provide the same rights and protections to students as public schools, such as the protections in the Civil Rights Act, Title IX, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Private schools are not obligated to enforce Title IX, even when schools fail to create safe from sexual harassment and assault, discriminate against pregnant and LGBTQ students, or limit or deny women and girls athletic opportunities. Students who use tax dollars to attend private schools are also stripped of the First Amendment, due process, and other constitutional and statutory rights guaranteed to them in public schools. Finally, Idaho's Constitution requires that this legislature, everyone, establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public free common schools and prohibits sectarian appropriations. Public schools, if adequately funded, maintained, and staffed, can and do offer a good education to all Idaho students. The legislature should focus on supporting and adequately funding our public schools rather than diverting our tax money to private schools. There are numerous other reasons to oppose a diversion of public money to private schools, but equity is our main concern today. We urge you to reject this bill. I would love to read my statement, but I won't.
Thank you. I would hate to have to gavel you down.
I like that.
Thank you all for your testimony. We will give the podium over to Representative Horman to close the testimony portion. We would ask you, if you can, to keep it to about 5 minutes. Representative Horman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Will do. Would just like to respond to a few of the comments that you've heard in testimony. There were some wild allegations I'm not going to touch, but in terms of accountability, Representative Andrus, I gave an example when I was here before about almost 100% proficiency on teacher evaluations, but significantly lower percentages of reading proficiency. So I would argue there are a multitude of accountability measures in public schools, but they are relatively ineffective in terms of generating results and outcomes for some children. I will reiterate, there is a budget cap of $50 million that cannot change unless a future legislature changes it. Arizona is running a surplus, and I will be happy to provide the documentation and press release on that on the floor. I will also be happy to provide NAEP scores, gold standard in assessment of comparing how states are doing against each other, as well as how different types of schools should this bill reach the floor. It is true that most public schools are in urban areas. It is also true that most children or most private schools are in urban areas, but most children are in urban areas as well, and that there's still a multitude of choice options in rural areas, including private schools, charter schools, online, and micro schools. Representative Gannon, this bill does not change the existing system of how private schools vet their own teachers. You heard from a couple here that they have processes in place. This bill does not interrupt whatever those vetting processes are, but they do exist. Regarding public school funding, in the 10 years that I've been serving on the Joint Finance and Appropriation Committee, the public school budget has gone from $1.4 billion to over $2.8 billion, a 100% increase in 10 years during a time period when public school students have only increased by 8%. This is not an either-or proposition. This is a both-and. We all want strong public schools, and we want strong options for those few students for whom the existing options don't work. Let me share with you very briefly, and if you'll, Chairman Cannon, if I'm hitting my 5 minutes, but I would like to just briefly share this experience. I spoke at an Altura school in Idaho Falls in December to their first through third graders, and they asked me the question after I shared with them why I'm in elected office, and that is for every child to have the opportunity for an excellent education no matter where they're learning. And they had tougher questions than you all do. They said, why do you love kids so much? That was one of the questions. And I gave him the kid answer, which you're the hope for the future. It's going to be one of you standing here in 20, 30, 40 years talking about what's important to you. But let me give you the adult answer. Some of our children are dealt a very difficult deck in life. And I think I will save the story of my experience for later, but it is not fair that they are punished for the irresponsible choices of adults. And sometimes they pay the price for that in their education, and they need, for whatever reason, a different learning environment. This bill gives them that opportunity. Mr. Chairman, I have said before, and I will say again, Brown v. Board of Education said race cannot be the determining factor in school attendance. It is time for Idaho to take the step that income and the ability to read should not be connected to your address. Supporting all kids wherever they're learning is a civil rights issue of our time, and there is a moral, economic interest in supporting those children no matter where they're learning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Horman, Senator Den Hartog, all the testifiers, all the spectators. We appreciate you being here today. Committee, House Bill 93 is properly before us. Representative Gannon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I had a question on this criminal background check issue for the sponsors. Mr. Cargill indicated to ask the sponsors, and I have a question.
We will, in light of that, we will open up for one question, then we're going to close down the questioning. Which one of the sponsors wants to handle that question? Representative Horman, go ahead and ask your question. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Horman. And so what I'm understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm understanding that I'm sure the Cole Christian School does background checks on their teachers and the Catholic Church, but there's nothing in here that requires these schools, whether they be for-profit or not-for-profit, nothing in here that says that every recipient school has to have a background check.
Point of order, Representative Monks.
Questions are supposed to gather information, not make statements. And this is the continuing just of making statements and then saying comment on that. It's not supposed to provide information. Questions are supposed to attain information.
Thank you for the point of order. Representative Gannon, concisely state your question.
Okay.
And let's get on with it.
Yes. Where in this bill does it state that every recipient of the $5,000 or whatever amount, $7,500 checks from the state, where in this bill does it state that all of these schools will perform background checks, or the pods or the micro schools?
Thank you. Representative Horman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, I already answered that question. Whatever existing vetting processes that private schools use will continue. This bill does not interrupt whatever they're already doing.
Thank you, Representative Horman. Okay, committee. At this point, House Bill 93 is before the committee. Representative Hill.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we send House Bill 93 to the House with a do-pass recommendation.
Thank you, Representative Hill. We have a motion to send House Bill 93 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation. Representative Raybold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for a substitute motion.
Substitute motion is in order. Go ahead.
I move that we table House Bill 93, and if I could speak to my motion.
You may.
Is that a motion to lay on the table?
Hang on a second. What was your motion?
Mr. Chairman, my motion was to lay House Bill 93 on the table.
Okay. Non-debatable. You cannot speak to your motion. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification or that point of order.
Mr. Chairman, can I request a roll call vote?
You may. We have a substitute motion in front of the committee which is non-debatable and for which there has been a roll call vote requested. It is to table House Bill 93. Just for point of clarity, a yes vote on this would, in essence, kill this bill. A no vote on this will put us back to the initial motion, which was to send the House Bill 93 to the floor with a do pass. So we'll have our secretary conduct a roll call vote on the substitute motion. Yes.
Chairman Cannon.
No.
Vice Chairman Weber.
Yes.
Representative Shepard.
No.
Cheatham.
Yes.
Cornellis.
Yes.
Ehlers.
No.
Monks.
No.
Raymond.
Yes.
Andrus.
Nay.
Bruce.
No.
Hill.
No.
Raybold.
Yes.
Schertz.
No.
Gannon. Birch.
Do the noes want to be recorded? I guess they were recorded. Never mind. Just always a good time for a little bit of humor there, right? Okay, we have a motion on the before us now to send House Bill 93. Okay. The substitute motion has been defeated by a 7-8 vote. We have a motion now before us, the original motion, which is to send House Bill 93 to the floor with a due pass. Are there comments or debate with regard to that motion? Representative Raybold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I will note today that in the questions that I have asked, I have not once raised whether or not we should be discussing and pursuing school choice in the state of Idaho. I think we should be, and I think we have been. The concern that I have with House Bill 93 is the way that it attempts to execute this particular policy. It places on the Tax Commission a role that it has not previously held, and it requires it to put into place a program that, in theory, would require that it was checking with the Department of Education as it relates to whether or not a student is enrolled. It would have to have in place a system for verifying whether or not schools were accredited. It would have to have in place the ability to determine what curriculum is being taught. And again, these are elements that are a part of the very definitions of the bill itself. Then we come to the issue of the accountability survey. The accountability survey simply exists within the bill. There is no action that the legislature or the tax commission is directed to take based on the information that is provided within that survey. The lack of direction as it relates to that survey raises serious questions for me as to how that particular tool can function as a source of accountability for us. What precisely can we do as this legislation is currently written? It's not even indicated that the survey could be used for the purposes of contributing towards the application process in a given year. I also, with respect to the sponsors, believe that whether it was intended or not, they have set up a system where someone could apply for and receive the credit under this program while also receiving funds for the other two programs that were mentioned previously, Empowering Parents and Advanced Opportunities. We're setting up a system for students who reside outside of the non-public system to receive a significant amount of taxpayer funding with very limited oversight. We've also established that there is no cap on household. So while there is an X amount number of students that could potentially benefit from this program, we're attempting to limit how many families can potentially participate without having a cap in place. So before we vote today, I would ask each of us to consider the fact of whether or not this actually meets the standards of being fair, accountable, transparent, and responsible in a way that meets our obligation as legislators when it comes to spending taxpayer dollars. This is redistribution of wealth. It is a government subsidy. And I'm pretty sure we just had a debate the other day on the floor about how we wanted a tax policy that did not do those things. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point in time, I'm going to recognize myself to debate this bill. I'll be in favor of the motion, and I want to express why briefly. 2 or 3 points that have come up that I want to, that have come up not necessarily today, but have come up in this discussion. I hear a lot about this bill being referred to as a voucher. It is not a voucher. It is a tax credit. I hear a lot about how this bill would reduce public education dollars in Idaho. It would not. The public education budget would remain constant, unchanged, whether we pass this legislation or not. By definition, if people avail themselves of this and take themselves out of public education and put themselves into private education options, it would increase a stat that I hear a lot of that I think is people give a lot more importance to than I do, but because they give it importance, I want to mention it here, and that is the per pupil amount of dollars that Idaho spends on public education. If we leave public education dollars constant and have fewer students in public education, it by definition raises the per pupil amount that we are spending on public education in Idaho. I believe that the data that I've studied over the last year as we've debated school choice supports the idea that that budgets in other states, and I'll say this too, sometimes Idaho's on the cutting edge of moving into things, and that's great. We are not pioneering this. We would be the 33rd state, I believe, to adopt some sort of school choice program, and that gives us a wealth of data to study. My study on that leads me to believe that budgets are not exploding or blowing up as sometimes is being argued. And I think the data shows modest increases in outcomes both for public school students and for private school students in states that have adopted school choice measures. Finally, I want to say that if anything defines me as a public servant, it is a belief in the free markets and in a couple of tools or traits that free markets have that I think are super important, and that is choice and competition. I believe that choice and competition in the American economy over 250 years has brought more to the well-being and the standard of living increases of people of every economic class, more so than any government program ever has or ever will. It is this this tenet that drives my support of this program, this piece of legislation, and I think it's safe to say that the Republican Party and many stalwart figures in the Republican Party share that view of free markets and of choice and of competition. Ronald Reagan championed school choice measures in the mid-'80s, and school choice has been a platform in the Republican Party on a national level ever since. Donald Trump champions school choice. Governor Little, in his State of the State, championed school choice. In this time, when we have on a state level the Republican Party, which is historically in favor of school choice in the governor's office and in both houses of our Congress here, and where on a national level we have a similar setup, we have a chance here to do something, and I suggest we take advantage of that chance while we have it. Thank you. With that, we'll hear further debate. Representative Schertz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To debate the motion.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I approach this issue from somebody who is a proud product of our rural public schools. Rural public schools changed my life. They provided the opportunity for me to go on to college and to law school, to serve in the military, and to serve as a federal prosecutor. But I think so much of this debate has gotten ourselves into a false dichotomy. You're either with public schools or you're with school choice. That's not what this is about. You can have both. I think this bill has both in it, and I will continue to champion our public schools as someone who is proud of them. And I think we can have a school choice program like this that is limited in scope with $50 million, that has the right type of students we're after, people who are lower income, people who are disabilities, and that does not take money from public schools. This does not take money from public schools, which is super important to me. Fundamentally, and lastly, I've talked to so many parents across our district and so many individuals across our district, especially in Canyon County where I have a lot of constituents. This is about giving parents the opportunity to decide what they want with their children. It's about giving them that choice, especially lower income and kids with disabilities. And with that, I'll be supporting this bill to send it to the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not be supporting the motion if I can speak to that. This started out with the notion that this is about school choice. It is not about school choice. We already have school choice. This is about you paying for someone else's school choice. There are two fatal flaws in this bill. One is the assumption, and was stated here, that the costs will not go up unless a future legislature decides otherwise. Well, that's exactly the same thing as saying costs will go up when a future legislature decides to do so. And so there's zero protection about costs going up. And in fact, this bill only funds less than 10,000 students, and we have over 300,000 students that would be eligible for this. So it's clear that just by those numbers alone, the pressure to increase the amount towards this effort will clearly be put upon this legislature. There's also zero protection for any element of accountability that might be considered in this bill, because a future legislature can decide to remove them. So it's a false promise that the dollar amount is limited and that the accountability is there to whatever extent it is. The other fatal flaw in this bill is one of omission. There is zero consequences in this bill if a parent decides to divorce themselves from the public school system. They don't like it, they don't trust it, they think it's awful, we don't want anything to do with it. Well, if you want out, where is, your kid is gone. They don't get to come back for that school year. Okay, that is not in this bill, because right now, if they can come back, school has to take them. If you want to come back, you'd have to test for grade level. Who knows what kind of education you got? And so that's not in this bill, a requirement, a consequence of taking your kid out of the public school system. Where is the loss of access to the things that public schools offer, like participating in sports teams? That is not in this bill. What this amounts to, without consequences for this decision and saying, I want $5,000 or $5,000 credit, and I want all the benefits of the school system, there's no consequence. This winds up being a financial benefit to let you try out a private or religious school at no risk. Okay, so there needs to be consequences for these decisions. But there's one consequence that is inherent, and that is the loss of the protections that the public school system provides parents and students that are taken for granted but go away when you decide to bet on the private sector. Admittance. You may want to send your kid to a private school. They don't have to take you. Public schools do. Expulsion. Your child could be expelled for any reason without recourse. Public schools can't do that. Grievances. You have a grievance with a teacher? Public schools have to address that. Private schools can ignore it. Not only that, the easiest way to deal with a grievance is to expel your kid and get rid of the problem. Costs. Public schools can't raise the cost overnight. Private schools can raise the tuition. Accommodations, especially for those who are in special needs. Private schools don't have to do that. Public schools have systems, have processes to be able to do that. Safety, we talked about background checks. There is no requirement for any background checks. And then curriculum. I went through the Common Core wars in the House Education Committee to make sure we had the Idaho Core standards. We have no standards here, other than some vague words in there. So, at the end of the day, while this isn't a voucher per se, any dollar that goes towards paying for private schools is one less dollar available for public schools, one way or another. So, at the end of the day, our job is to morally, ethically, and constitutionally to support and protect the public school system, not lay the groundwork for financially destroying it.
Thank you, Representative Birch. Representative Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. And first of all, I want to commend everyone in the room, especially those who are providing quality education for Idaho students within or without the that doesn't sound right. Within or outside of the public education system, I truly appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity for parents to have choices, and I champion that. This is not an education bill, it's a tax bill. And I will not be supporting the original motion for two reasons. And one is that, and I think I've stated this before in other hearings, but this tax credit lies outside the appropriations process. In the event of an economic downturn, every Idahoan will live by the consequences of that downturn, and this tax credit will go on autopilot continually. Constitutionally, we as a body of legislators have the obligation to fund public education. In order to do that, we have to have revenue. And this tax credit is a tax shift to those who continue to support the revenue side of the public education system. Some are exempt from that. A $50 million exemption will be exempt from supporting that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot support the original motion.
Thank you. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I note that a non-public school includes things called micro schools, learning pods, other academic institutions for eligible students. Very concerned about the accountability, very concerned about our kids, very concerned about everybody's children to make sure they have a safe and effective school system in the 21st century. These kids have to learn. It's going to be tougher for my grandkids in the 21st century than it's ever been because of the kinds of jobs that are going to be available and require skills. And if we have with taxpayer money, our money, supporting things called micro schools or learning pods, and we have a responsibility at least to have some kind of minimal supervision. And that includes, and I can't vote for anything, any kind of bill that doesn't require background checks for the people who are teaching our Idaho kids. I think we've learned the hard way how important that is. And with people moving around the country, I just think that is just a no-brainer, absolute, essential first thing to be required before you give anything called a micro school or a learning pod or something like that, any kind of money. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Monks.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to address maybe some of the concerns. First, I would like to recognize the fact that I think the best thing I'm hearing about everybody here from the committee and those that are out there is they just want a good education for kids, and that's the Idaho way. That we want a good education for kids. So I don't fault anybody for having difference of opinions. I think we all want something the same. We just have different ways of getting about that. A couple things I did want to bring up. Chairman, you already mentioned up the Trump administration, and Reagan, I can scratch those off my list because those I had on my list to do. The other thing I think it's important to know is Idaho's way behind on this. We're way behind. Every conservative state in the country, minus Texas, has school choice options, and Texas is probably going to pass that here pretty shortly. So we're behind the curve on that. We're not ahead of the curve on that. We talk about we have choice. You're right, we have choice. I like to compare it to we're going to Taco Bell. You can have a taco, a burrito, an enchilada, but we're having Taco Bell. And that's what the choices are. It's all the choices that are run through the public sector there. And that's okay. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that that's the choice that you get. I'd like to expand that choice. Sometimes it's okay to go to McDonald's or KFC or wherever you like to go. So I think our choices are very limited right now because they're all underneath the same umbrella of what we have. Funding. Well, we always talk about funding, and we're always afraid that somehow we're going to defund schools if we have less kids going there.
I believe last year that one of the sponsors here actually knows a lot about funding, probably more than anybody else here, and I appreciate her expertise when it comes to funding and making sure that education will be funded. If I have my numbers right, and I'm pretty sure I do, that last year we had 696 less support units. Again, that's about 19 students per support unit, so do the math there. Approximately 13,000 students less last year attended public schools, and yet we increased funding by almost 4%, another $200 million in extra spending when we had less students. So the idea that if we have all these kids leaving the public school going to these other options, that somehow we're going to defund them, I think is not accurate. History has not shown that. I don't think we will do that. Future legislators, we talked about that, the good gentleman from 17 over there. We can't tie the hands of any future legislature. That's how this works. If they want to come in here and dismantle our launch program this year, they can. Next year, they can double it, they can triple it. Those are all options of future legislators. This is what we want to do here. We put a cap on it for $50 million. It cannot be increased. It cannot, unless the legislature chooses to. And so you say, well, they could choose to increase it. You're right, they could, but they could also choose to decrease it too. So that's just the rationale on the funding aspect of that. As I listened to some of the concerns of good gentlemen from 15 and 17 about accountability and where we're at with that, and how come we don't have accountability or a grievance program where you can go talk to the teacher, or you can go talk to a counselor, you can go all these different things. We have that in public education. If you want public education, go to public education. You have all of those things available to you. Why are we trying to duplicate a system? We're trying to do something different, so we don't want to do the same things. We don't want to have those same accountability measures that frankly have not panned out for us. If we look at our school results from reading in 3rd grade or 8th grade, we are not doing well. I've seen anywhere from 30 to 40% proficient in some of those things. That is not a good number. We've got to provide other options for other people here. That's what we're doing. $5,000, we talk about 10,000 students. Again, $5,000, it has to be verifiable expenses. You can't get more. You don't just get $5,000. I'm pulling my kid out. Give me my $5,000 check. It doesn't work that way. These are verifiable expenses that you have to show that you spent it on it. I've got a whole lot of lists here, and I'm gonna just hit on last thing here. I know we're out of time there, Chairman, and so I apologize for this. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I think it's worth repeating here. I got 8 kids, and they've gone through just about every type of education that you can find. I've had kids that have gone through the public system, valedictorian, I got one of those. All went on to college, 4 of them did. Real smart kids, did a great job with that, and really proud of the efforts they've done. We tried them in charter schools, in regular schools, and magnet schools. They've done all of those things as well. I also have 4 children that I adopted, and they all have special needs. Public school didn't work for some of them. Did for some. A couple of them that worked out great. Had a couple that didn't work out as well. We tried charter schools, we tried regular public schools, we tried different public schools. Moved them around here to there until we found a program that worked for us. It happened to be like a micro school or a micro pod, and that's what worked for us. Now, my daughter is going to be gone, just like Senator Jen Hartog there. She's not going to be other than I'm not going to be able to take advantage of this because she's going to be too old here before we can get this in place. So it's not going to benefit me. It's not going to benefit my kids. I think it's important to know as well. But I want other people to have those options. I want them to be able to have an option to say, you know what, it didn't work where I'm at. That is not a dig on our public schools. It is not. It's okay to say that education that they're providing didn't work. It's okay. But we're going to provide them another option, another choice. And that's what this is. It's a responsible way of doing it. The accountability, that's the last thing that everybody keeps talking about. I will argue till I'm blue in the face, there is nobody more accountable and cares more about their kids' education than a parent. All the good-meaning teachers out there, they love our students, they care about our students, they are wonderful people, but they do not care as much about my child's education as I do. That's where the accountability starts, and that's where it stops. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd encourage your support of this legislation as well.
Thank you so much. We have a motion to send House Bill 93 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. We'll have a voice vote, absent a motion to the contrary. Roll call vote has been requested and will be done. Our secretary will conduct a roll call vote on the motion to send House Floor 93 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Chairman Cannon.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Weber.
No.
Representatives Shepard.
Yes.
Cheatham.
No.
Cornelis.
No.
Ehlers.
Yes.
Monks.
Yes.
Raymond. No. Andrus.
Yes.
Bruce.
Yes.
Hill.
Yes.
Raybold.
No.
Schertz.
Aye.
Gannon. No. Birch.
Committee, that motion has passed by an 8-7 vote. House Bill 93 will be sent to the floor with a due pass recommendation. That concludes our business for today.